Greetings and welcome to another edition of Alusine Multicultural Family Consulting. I'm happy to be here with you to share my thoughts on the topic of language and meaning. The idea is to share information from a communicative point of view on how we use language to convey meaning. There are many definitions that come to mind when we think of language and how meaning is conveyed. But sometimes the language of the sender affects the communication. Sometimes the language of the receiver, their knowledge of the language used, affects the meaning that they give to messages. So language, in a sense, is an institution of a community. In other words, if you belong to a given community, it means you share a common language with members of that community. Sometimes when cultures meet, or when cultures mix, or when cultures cross, new words are formed. Sometimes words disappear. And sometimes we use words from a cultural context to denote meaning. So all of those are views of language. There is the triangle of meaning. The triangle of meaning teaches us the symbolic nature of language. That I think of a word to refer to what I think of, I use a symbol. Symbols can be derived in two ways. Symbols can be denotative. If I use language which everyone who speaks the same language gets the same meaning, that's denotation. Symbols can be connotative. Sometimes only a few people understand the meaning. So whether in an educational context, in a healthcare context, in a religious context, and in a business context, the language that's used is symbolic. We use symbols as representations of our thoughts, our feelings, our ideas, our sentiments, our emotions. All of those in the triangle of meaning, I use a word as a reference to what meaning I intend to convey. There are many views of language. There is semantics, the arrangement of code units. If I say the blue car smashed into the red car, it's different if I say the red car smashed into the blue car. Sometimes how we arrange code units, what happens first, what happens after that. The structure and the components affect the use of language. There is also semiotics. Semiotics is the study of signs as means of representation of language and use. There is pragmatist. For pragmatists, when someone uses language, what is the relationship to the receivers of the language. That's the pragmatist. A good way to look at language and meaning in terms of a cultural context is the Whorfian hypothesis. The Whorfian hypothesis teaches us that the world is perceived differently by members of different communities. And sometimes we can tell how people perceive the world by the way they use language. The Eskimos have more than 10 words for snow. Why? Because it happens so frequently, they have a way of describing the different types of snow. So the Whorfian hypothesis is relevant, that the way people perceive the world is based on, their experience and their knowledge. That's the Whorfian hypothesis. So language is an institution of a community. My personal philosophy of language is based on what I call the language paradigm. The language paradigm sort of explains almost everything we need to know about language and how meaning is conveyed. The language paradigm is divided into 3 components. The first is the form of life. Sometimes we can find meaning in the relationship between the communicants. Sometimes we can find meaning based on the context or the situation we are in. So the context is one way we identify meaning. Another way we identify meaning is based on the episode we are in. There are 5 episodes we engage in when we communicate. Sometimes we are in initiation, small talk. I want to know you, you want to know me, or we are engaged in small talk. Sometimes the episode is on definition. We define the relationship we have with one another. And when we define the relationship, there are rules. The stated rules, the implied rules. Then there is the development of the episode, and there is the termination of the episode. So all of those are ways we use meaning. Sometimes by understanding the episode you are in, when you communicate using language, that affects meaning. The third way meaning is conveyed is by symbolic acts. Symbolic acts are the utterances, the verbal communication. Symbolic acts are based sometimes on intent. It's not what the person says, but sometimes the motive behind what they say. There are 3 ways we look at symbolic acts. One is the prepositional force. When someone uses language, what are they referring to? 2, we look at the expressive force. How does the person communicate or evoke the emotion? Then 3, we look at the consequential force. What's the effect of the language use? So my philosophy of language is based on the context, the episodes, and the symbolic acts. So in conclusion for today's topic, I want to say language is an institution of a community. It is governed by rules. Language is symbolic. Sometimes meanings are denotative, sometimes meanings are connotative. Language is based on semantics, how we arrange the code units. Language is based on semiotics and the signs and the rules. Language is based on pragmatics, the effect of the language on the receivers. So in a simple sense, when we use language, we are using words. Words can refer to many things. Words can bring people together. Words can set people apart. Words can include others. Words can exclude others. Words convey meaning. Sometimes words obscure meaning. But whenever we use language, it's good to affirm the uniqueness of the other person from a relational point of view. So language can best be described in terms of its rhetorical function. Sometimes there is the rhetor, sometimes there is the rhetoric, sometimes there is the rhetorical situation. So those three are ways to understand how we use language to convey meaning. If this sort of thing interests you, buy my books. I've written 5 textbooks, and some of my textbooks describe the uses of language as a way to convey meaning. We convey meaning, of course, based on our understanding of the process of communication. We communicate meaning based on our self-concept, based on our perception, based on our relational objectives. But anytime we use language, we are conveying meaning. Some do so directly, some do so indirectly. But meaning is at the essence of language use and communication. So if you want more meaning, buy one of the Kanu's textbooks. Thank you for your time. It's always a pleasure, and I hope somehow I think about, the relational views I have of my listeners. So thank you and God bless.